Hey everyone, so you're getting ready for a trip to Cape Kiwanda, huh? Well, we're here to help you come back with some seriously amazing photos.
Awesome.
We've been checking out this podcast called Cape Kiwanda Adventures, and they had an episode all about getting the best pics from this Oregon coast gem.
Sounds right up our alley.
It does. Get ready because we're about to take you on a visual journey from the top of the dunes all the way down to the ocean's edge.
You got it.
And yeah, fair warning that dune climb is a bit of a challenge, but the podcast makes it clear that the call from the top, totally worth it.
Absolutely.
So set the scene for us. What makes Cape Kiwanda so special for photography?
Well, you've got these dramatic cliffs, right? And then off in the distance, you can see the iconic Haystack Rock.
Oh, wow. I've seen pictures.
And, of course, you can't forget that massive sand dune.
Yeah, the podcast mentioned that dune is a 240-foot climb, straight up. They even compared it to a treadmill on max incline.
Haha, yeah, it's a good workout.
I bet. But we're all about those panoramic views, especially at sunrise or sunset.
Now you're talking. Those are the money shots, for sure.
So any pro tips from the podcast on how to capture those perfect golden hour moments?
Definitely. Aim to shoot right after sunrise or before sunset. That's what photographers call golden hour.
Yeah, I've heard it at, but what makes it so special, especially for landscapes like this?
The light. During golden hour, the sun is lower, so it casts this warm glow on everything.
Oh, I see.
And the shadows are longer and softer, which gives your photos a really cool depth.
I can picture it.
Perfect for those rugged cliffs and the waves.
Makes sense. I bet the drone shots from that summit would be incredible.
Oh, yeah,
Definitely got to check those drone regulations first, though.
for sure.
Okay, let's talk composition. Any cool tips from the podcast on framing up those shots?
Well, Cape Kiwanda has these amazing natural sandstone archways.
I love those.
And the podcast really emphasized using them to frame the ocean.
I bet that creates some cool perspective.
Totally. It adds depth and scale.
So those archways become these natural frames, leading your eye right to the ocean.
You got it.
And while we're on the subject of the ocean, we got to talk about those waves. Any advice on how to capture them?
Absolutely. If you want those shots where the waves look frozen in time, you got to use a fast shutter speed.
Like, how fast are we talking?
Like 11,000 of a second, maybe even faster.
Yeah, that's fast.
This way you freeze the action and catch all those awesome details of the spray and foam.
I can only imagine. What about that smooth, dreamy look you see in some photos?
Ah, you mean long exposures.
Yeah.
For that, you got to slow your shutter speeds way down.
Interesting.
Think 14 of a second or slower.
So it's all about playing with that shutter speed to create different effects.
You got it.
Oh, and what about those polarizing filters I've heard about? Do those help make those ocean blues even more vibrant?
Absolutely. They cut down the glare and make the colors pop, especially near the water.
Awesome. And I think I remember the podcast mentioning some wildlife sightings too, right?
Yeah. Keep an eye out for peregrine falcons. They nest on the cliffs.
Wow, that'd be a cool shot.
And you might even spot some sea lions.
Okay, this is all sounding amazing. But we can't forget about safety.
Right. Definitely important.
The podcast really emphasized how dangerous this place can be, as beautiful as it is.
Yeah, you got to be careful out there.
Especially with those sandstone cliffs, right?
Especially those cliffs. The podcast made it clear that they're really unstable.
It's that scary to think about.
Yeah, they're constantly eroding.
So you could be standing on what looks like solid ground
And
and
it could just give way.
so staying behind those fenced-off areas is a must.
Absolutely. No photo is worth risking your safety.
Speaking of safety, we can't forget about those rogue waves either.
Oh, yeah, those are unpredictable.
They can sneak up on you and knock you off your feet before you even know what hit you,
Exactly. And the podcast had some great advice for that. Never turn your back on the ocean.
especially when you're near the waterline.
Especially then.
So if you're setting up a shot near the shore, make sure you have an escape route.
Always good to be prepared, and we'll go over more specific safety tips later.
Okay, sounds good. But for now, I'm already picturing myself up on that dune, wind in my hair, taking in that incredible view. What else did the podcast recommend for capturing those epic landscapes?
Well, they talked about focusing on those smaller details, too.
You mean like finding little treasures within the grand landscape?
Exactly. Things like the textures of the sand and rocks, or the patterns left by the waves.
I bet that adds a whole other dimension to the photos.
It totally does.
And Cape Kiwanda also seems like a perfect place for action shots with those crashing waves and maybe even some birds in flight.
For sure. For those, the podcast recommended using your camera's burst mode to capture the movement.
So instead of a single image, you get a whole sequence of the action.
Exactly. Like a mini movie of the waves crashing.
That's so cool. But all this talk about getting close to the action brings us back to safety.
You're right. It's always good to be mindful.
We touched on the cliffs earlier, but maybe we should elaborate a bit more.
Yeah, it's worth repeating. Those cliffs are super unpredictable.
It looks so solid, but
But they're not. They can crumble at any moment.
that's a little scary to think about.
Yeah, so it's crucial to stick to the designated trails and viewpoints and stay well back from the edge.
No photo is worth risking your life for.
Absolutely.
And we can't forget about those rogue waves either.
Definitely not. Always be aware of your surroundings.
So back to those amazing landscapes, what tips did the podcast offer for composing those grand, sweeping shots from the dune?
They emphasize the importance of using a strong foreground element.
You mean like finding something in the foreground to create depth and lead your eye toward the main subject?
Exactly. It could be driftwood, a lone tree, even interesting patterns in the sand.
I never would have thought of that.
It's all about adding those extra layers of interest.
And I bet the light changes so dramatically throughout the day at Cape Kiwanda.
Oh yeah. It's different at every hour, creating a unique mood.
It's like having a whole new canvas to work with. That makes me wonder, what lenses did the podcast recommend for capturing all these different perspectives?
For those wide, expansive views from the dune, they suggested using a wide-angle lens.
I can see why. You want to fit as much of that scene as possible.
Right. But if you want to zoom in on a specific detail, like a rock formation or a wave crashing far off in the distance, they recommended a telephoto lens.
Interesting. It's amazing how those different lenses can change the entire feel of a photo.
It's like having a different set of eyes, and I think that's a good place to pause for now.
Yeah, I think we've given our listeners a lot to digest. We'll be back soon to wrap up our Cape Kiwanda deep dive with some final thoughts and inspiration to help you capture the spirit of this amazing place.
Stay tuned.
Okay, so we're back, and I'm already itching to get out there and start snapping some pics.
I hear you.
You know, what's really cool is that this podcast made me realize Cape Kiwanda is about way more than just those big landscape shots.
Oh, totally.
It's about those smaller details too, right?
Absolutely. The podcast talked about focusing on things like textures.
Like what kind of textures?
Well, think about the rugged sandstone or the smooth, wet sand where it reflects the sky,
Oh, yeah.
or even those cool patterns the waves leave behind when they recede.
It's like a whole other world of compositions just waiting to be discovered.
Exactly.
And those little details can really make a photograph stand out, you know?
Sure.
It's like finding hidden treasures within the grand landscape.
I like that. And, while we're talking about finding those unique moments,
Yeah.
Cape Kiwanda is also a great spot for action shots.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
The crashing waves, birds in flight, that kind of thing.
I bet those would be amazing. I think the podcast had some tips for capturing those powerful wave shots, right?
They did. Besides using a fast shutter speed,
Uh-huh.
they suggested playing around with your camera's burst mode.
What's that?
It lets you take a rapid sequence of photos, so you increase your chances of catching that perfect split-second moment,
Oh, I get it.
whether it's the wave breaking or the spray exploding into the air.
So cool. So instead of one static image, you're capturing a whole series of movements.
You got it.
Almost like a mini movie of the wave's energy.
Exactly.
This is giving me so many ideas. But all this talk about getting close to the action makes me think about safety again.
Oh, for sure.
We mentioned those unstable cliffs earlier, but maybe we should dive into that a bit more.
Yeah, it's worth emphasizing how dangerous they can be.
I mean, they look so solid in pictures.
But the podcast really stressed that they're constantly eroding.
So what might seem like solid ground?
Could just crumble beneath your feet.
Yikes. Okay, so staying on those designated trails and viewpoints is super important.
Absolutely. And stay well back from the edge.
It's just not worth the risk.
Not at all.
And those rogue waves are no joke either, right?
No joke at all. They're powerful and unpredictable.
You could get swept away in an instant.
That's why the podcast kept saying, respect the power of nature.
It's a good reminder. Okay, so I'm picturing myself at the top of that dune again.
With that amazing view.
Exactly. What did the podcast say about composing those grand landscape shots?
Well, they talked a lot about the importance of the foreground.
Foreground.
Yeah, like finding something interesting in the foreground to add depth and draw the viewer into the scene.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about the background.
Nope, it could be some driftwood on the sand, the silhouette of a tree,
Gotcha.
even just cool patterns in the sand itself.
It's like creating a story within the photo.
Exactly. It really elevates the whole composition.
And I imagine the light at Cape Kiwanda changes so much throughout the day.
It does. The podcast talked about how each time of day creates a totally different mood.
So cool.
Dawn has those soft golden hues, perfect for a serene vibe.
And then midday.
Midday sun can create dramatic shadows and contrast,
And of course, sunset is just magical.
with those incredible colors painting the sky.
This is making me so excited to experiment. It makes me think about the different lenses you could use too.
Oh yeah, lenses are key. The podcast recommended a wide-angle lens for those expansive views from the dune.
Makes sense. You want to capture as much as possible.
But if you want to zero in on a specific detail,
Like what?
like a rock formation or a wave crashing in the distance,
Yeah, yeah.
then a telephoto lens is your best friend.
So it's like having a whole toolkit to work with.
Exactly, and I think that's a great place to take a little break.
Yeah, let's give everyone a chance to absorb all this awesome info.
We'll be back soon to wrap things up and send you off on your Cape Kiwanda photography adventure.
Stay tuned. Okay, we're back. Ready to wrap up our Cape Kiwanda deep dive.
I'm ready.
We've talked about a lot. Gear, composition, safety, even some wildlife tips.
We have.
But this podcast,
Yeah,
it really made me think about the heart of this place.
the essence of it.
Exactly. What makes it so special beyond just being a beautiful spot for photos?
Yeah, it's got this raw, untamed beauty that's hard to describe.
It really is.
It's the wind shaping the dunes, that powerful ocean, those cliffs that look like they're defying gravity.
It's like stepping back in time to a place where nature is still in charge.
Exactly. And that's what we want to capture in our photos, right?
Right. It's more than just getting the settings right or finding a good composition.
It's about conveying that feeling, that raw energy that makes Cape Kiwanda unique.
But how do you do that? How do you translate a feeling into a photograph?
I think it starts with being present, really experiencing the place.
Yeah, yeah.
The podcast talked about taking the time to feel the wind, listen to the waves.
To notice the little things.
Exactly. The light, the shadow.
It's like putting the camera down for a minute and just absorbing everything.
Exactly. And then when you do pick up your camera,
Yeah.
trust your instincts. Don't be afraid to experiment.
Like what kind of experiments?
Try different angles, move around, see the landscape from different points of view.
Oh, I get it. It's about finding your own vision, your own way of seeing Cape Kiwanda.
That's what makes photography so cool.
It's a journey.
It is. It's a way of connecting with the world around us.
And Cape Kiwanda, with all its changing moods and landscapes,
Yeah.
it's like a playground for that kind of exploration.
It is.
Okay, before I wrap up,
Yeah.
any last words of wisdom from the podcast for those heading out on their Cape Kiwanda adventure?
Oh, they emphasized being prepared. Dress in layers, bring water, wear good shoes for that dune climb,
Good call.
and of course, respect the environment.
Oh, yeah, that's huge. Leave no trace, right?
Exactly. Stay on the trails, pack out what you pack in.
We want this place to be just as beautiful for the next generation.
We do.
Well, I think we can safely say that this deep dive,
Yeah.
it's given us way more than just photography tips.
It has.
It's given us a whole new appreciation for Cape Kiwanda
And reminded us to connect with nature.
in a meaningful way.
I think so too.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
Imagine yourself at the top of that dune, camera in hand, that vast ocean in front of you.
I can picture it.
What story will your photos tell? What unique perspective will you bring?
The possibilities are endless.
And that's a wrap on our Cape Kiwanda deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It's been fun.
Now go out there, explore, create, and capture the magic of Cape Kiwanda. We can't wait to see what you come up with. Until next time, happy shooting.